Everything is happening through these screens.
How are we getting the most out of that person?
I want to see this thing grow long term.
Amazing story. You have such a unique perspective on that.
Schedule a 2-week vacation.
I applaud those models.
Undervalue.
Secure your digital footprint as well.
Why were they even put in place in the first place?
Only the most adaptable survive. Let's get to the leaders list. Hey, if compensation is our biggest line item, why do we treat it like a guessing game? You know, we wing it, we misalign our teams inadvertently, we wonder why performance stalls, and then we start to recognize compensation isn't a finance issue, it's a leadership issue. And it's something that if we get it right, it helps drive performance, it removes the CEO bottleneck, and it's why it should be on your leaders list. It's also the reason that we've invited Tom Miller, who's the president of VisionLink Advisory Group, and he's been working with over 2,000 CEOs to help them stop treating compensation like an expense and instead turn it into a strategic investment. So if you want to scale without losing your culture or your margins, then this is the right conversation to listen to. I'm Bryon Morrison. Let's get to the leaders list. All right, Tom Miller, president at VisionLink Advisory Group. Thank you for being on the leaders list.
Thanks for having me, Bryon. Good to be here.
Absolutely. Tom, I wanted to have you on the show because one of the most important things in any organization that's going through a new growth stage is just understanding how they can incent their staff correctly, how they can compensate them correctly, how they can figure out the most important asset, which is their people. And give them happiness and satisfaction, and certainly compensation is a big part of that. So, Tom, you're an expert in the field, and we appreciate your time just helping us understand that whole space.
Thanks, Bryon. It's great to be here. I look forward to chatting about it. You mentioned it's the most important. It may or may not be the most important thing, but it's probably the most expensive thing on most companies' P&L, right? If you look at compensation, it's a big expense.
Yeah. Well, let's start off, Tom, because one of the things we always like in the leaders list is to talk to pros who are actually running their own businesses also. And so we learn a little bit about them. If you could share a little bit about VisionLink, how you got the business started and why, and just tell us a little bit about that. That'd be a great place to start.
Okay, sure. Yeah, started the business in 1999, if you remember that century. And I came out of the executive benefits world, so a related, kind of a cousin to compensation, and was spending time there and dealing with a lot of CEOs, business owners, CFOs. And I just kind of randomly discovered that they were more interested in talking about compensation than benefits. So I kept probing, learning more, and one day literally just said, hey, I'm going to go in the compensation consulting business, and hired a couple people that knew that world, and kind of went from there. And it's been really fun. Learned a lot over those years and talked to probably 2,000 CEOs or business owners about compensation issues. So I love the topic.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing when you think about, like, in 25 years of being focused on that as an expert. We're looking forward to learning from you. So if we were talking about VisionLink, or we're talking about VisionLink, tell us a little bit about how you would describe the stage of business you're in and your company's in.
Well, our business is now has a national footprint across the U.S., Canada, and even overseas in providing compensation, direction, advice, support, resources, even software for growing companies, primarily private companies who want to be bigger in 3 or 5 or 10 years than they are today. And so we have a group of consultants. We have a group. We have a development team with software that provides resources for them. And we're just like many or most businesses are in growth mode ourselves, looking to extend our reach into more and more organizations where we can help.
Okay. And when you say growth mode, you mean in terms of building your clientele, continuing to expand your client base? That's the primary focus?
Yeah, we've served about 1,200 businesses in the last 25 plus years. Our goal is to reach 10,000 in the next 3 years through scaling our business, our software tools, and our community. So yeah, we want to grow in many ways, but particularly get our concepts, principles, and resources in the hands of more and more business owners.
Wow. What made you decide to expand at that pace? Because that's a pretty high ramp.
Well, it's an underserved market. We generally say we work in the SMB, the small to mid-sized business, plus middle market companies. That's kind of our range. Most of our clients have 20 to 2,000 employees. Kind of the midpoint's probably 100, 200, 300. And it is an underserved market with respect to information and expertise on compensation. So most compensation consulting firms are big, even global, and they serve the Fortune 500, the Fortune 1000. Those companies spend a lot of money working with high-end consultants and advisory firms, getting compensation right. But the smaller businesses don't have access immediately to those resources, or they find them too expensive. So our mission is to digitize and demonetize and democratize our processes and information and get it in the hands of more and more businesses at an affordable price point.
I love it. There's a lot of good D's. So what are you doing differently, Tom, with VisionLink to attain, to reach that goal?
Yeah, I think the big thing we did about 6-7 years ago, we decided to invest heavily in the software platform. So we built a cloud-based, secure set of tools that clients can access and utilize that makes our job and their job easier. So if they want to deal with or work with one of our consultants, instead of charging the kind of fees that these big comp houses are going to charge, we can charge maybe a third of that or even a fourth of that, because most of the work or a lot of the work is going to be done or facilitated or enhanced by our software. And so it makes it less expensive for the user, for the client, and accelerates our ability or expands our ability to serve more customers. So it improves our business model, makes it more affordable to the customer. And actually now, since our software is adding artificial intelligence components to it, it makes it even better so that they're getting the experience of all of our consultants wrapped into the software rather than just a single consultant that they may be dealing with.
Yeah. Well, I mean, clearly you're a pro and you've been around the block. So you're focusing first on the infrastructure to be able to serve everybody properly. And now that gives you the ability to scale your customer base, right?
Right. And I think what our unique ability is that we can take complex issues, and compensation is pretty complex, and simplify it, organize it in a way that it's more easily understood. We like to disrupt some of the traditional thinking, kind of disavow some of the premises that people build their incentive plans on, for example, and teach correct principles. And then that makes the process and for implementation easier and more effective.
What was the hardest part, Tom, for you to get to this stage where you can scale and grow? Was it your own leadership abilities? Was it your leadership team? Was it finding the right staff? Was it building that platform? Like what was the hardest part, or what are the biggest challenges you've run into?
I think two things. Kind of unifying our team, bringing on the right consultants who could relate to our philosophy and approach, and unifying them around using consistent processes to help more and more clients. Secondly, then it was developing the software. I'm not a software engineer. None of our other consultants were. So we had to find the right resources outside the organization, and until ultimately we brought in our own team to help manage our software. That's a big investment, a big commitment, but boy, it's really paid dividends for us and our clients.
That's great. That alone, I think, is an incredible learning point for our listeners, just the fact that you've gone through it. But now let's shift a little bit into your area of expertise in compensation. So if I'm, dealing with this a lot. You brought this up. It's probably the biggest expense, on my P&L. And so if I'm kind of thinking of it only as expense, what are the risks around that, and how should I maybe reframe compensation in my own mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. I could talk for a long time on that. Let me try and bring it down to kind of a metaphor. Let's say that when I talk to a business owner, I ask them, what's the sum total of your compensation commitment? Add up all your salaries, wages, commissions, benefits, payroll taxes. What's that going to amount to? And usually they will say, I don't know. Let me guess. And so they may come up with a number. Let's say it was $5 million. Then I ask, let's imagine you had $5 million to invest for long-term growth, and you hired an investment advisor, a wealth manager, and you said, help me invest this $5 million. Well, they would ask you a lot of questions such as, well, what are your goals? What's your risk tolerance? What's your experience level? And they would then take all of those things into consideration, and they would offer a portfolio recommendation that will help you achieve your goals with the lowest risk and hopefully the lowest cost. And so you would have that discussion, agree on a portfolio, and launch that effort. Once a business owner or a CEO begins to think about their compensation budget as an investment instead of an expense, they now begin to ask and look for the answers to the question of, well, how do I measure the return on that investment? How should I allocate my pay, just like you might allocate an investment strategy, in order to achieve the best results, to attract the people I need that will fit our demographic, our philosophy, our culture, and reward them appropriately so they'll be excited about their pay opportunity because they see how it's aligned with our business goals. So beginning that process of thinking about that compensation expense, turning it into an investment in your mind is the first place to start. And from there, new conversations open up and new solutions can be devised.
I love that perspective that it's compensation aligns with your values and your brand and your culture. And it's often, I'm sure you look at it holistically, but I would imagine a lot of people just look at it as the line item and don't recognize it that way.
Yeah. And so what happens is shareholders, let's say you have shareholders who are not running the business. So and they have to generally approve in one form or another new compensation programs, new strategies that might be implemented. Something as simple as we want to add a dental plan to our benefits program. Well, what's that going to cost? Immediately, everything gets framed in the construct of what is it going to cost us? If you can begin to measure the return on compensation and have consistent ways to track it, shareholders can now engage in a discussion from that perspective. Okay, well, I see that we're getting a return on our investment now. Let's see what this will add to that return. And so what you do once you begin thinking about compensation as an investment, the next step is to draft a compensation philosophy statement. Think of it as a 1.5-page written document that expresses what we as an organization believe about pay. Why are we paying people? What do we pay for? How do we try to match up with the market or with our peers? What types of incentive plans do we offer? What is their purposes? So you capture the essence. Think of it as kind of your Declaration of Independence, your expression of our belief about pay, and it becomes a dynamic way to recruit people. So if I was offering you a job, Bryon, before we talked about the amount of pay, I'd say, here, read our pay philosophy. Let's see if we're in sync, because it reflects our culture, our beliefs, our values, and how we use pay to reward you for great performance.
That's really smart, Tom. How many companies that before you work with them, had already implemented something like that?
Yeah, 1 out of 30 or 40, perhaps.
Yeah.
Now you can ask them, what's your pay philosophy? And they'll start to say, oh, I guess it's this or that.
Yeah.
And you say, let's help you frame that a little tighter and get it in writing and vet it. It becomes the standards by which you live. So when somebody comes to you in a year and says, hey, how come this happened on pay? You can say, well, let's refer back to our pay philosophy. If we're not adhering to it, call me out. But if it's in our pay philosophy that you acknowledged, we should agree that we're doing our best to live by it.
Man, that's such a great, when you document something, it shows a commitment and consistency, and just builds trust. It's, one of the tools that I consistently use is personal user manuals. When I work with CEOs, I think to myself, like, look, is there a way for you to explain who you are, what you believe in, and how you manage before somebody comes and works with you? And so it's kind of the same mindset, right? The more you can put that down in writing and say, this is my beliefs and I'm committed to them, the more they can feel comfortable being a part of that organization.
Yeah, and it aligns with that analogy or metaphor I used of the investment advisor. Your investment advisor is going to bring you a investment policy statement.
Yep.
Okay, Bryon, we're going to invest your $5 million. Here's how we're going to invest it. Here's the philosophy, the guidelines, the expectations, the realities, the risks. Sign off on it. And they might even have you literally sign off on it, so that later when you come back and say, how come you invested in that rotten mutual fund? They can say, well, you remember it was part of our pay philosophy, and here's how it balances out other elements of our investment strategy.
Yeah. So, if we have CEOs that are taking companies through these incredibly important tipping point moments, we find that that's typically staff-based, because humans create complexity, right? So if I'm thinking about 25 employees, 75 employees, 150 employees, I would imagine that if you don't have consistency in compensation, at a certain point that becomes unbearable and really will cause the organization to implode. When do you think that is absolutely vital? Is that day one? Or is that when you get past one of those growth points? Or is it some other trigger that really is changing in the business? Like, I'm thinking about getting serious about M&A, and I'm going to go buy another firm. I got to have my own house in order. Like, when do you think that this becomes more and more important, Tom?
Yeah, you mentioned the word consistency. When people are drafting and we're helping them draft their pay philosophy statement, we'll say, you know what, you're probably going to want to embed fairness and consistency as fundamental values in your pay philosophy statement, so that people can't say, hey, you treated this person differently than me in similar circumstances. Now, there are always exceptions, and there can be reasons for exceptions, but pay gets complicated as soon as you hire your first employee. And it gets more complicated when you hire your second one. So as your company grows, you enter into what we call compensation chaos. Decision-making becomes challenging in order to be fair and consistent. And you're not sure sometimes who to credit for decisions that have been made about pay. And so you need a system. We have an operating system we help clients embrace called the VisionLink compensation system. And it has some elements to it that say, okay, if you're doing these things consistently, you are now getting into the good operating system. Most organizations don't have a compensation expert until they're at maybe 300, 400, 500, 600 employees. Mm-hmm. They have an HR person or team that's charged with managing pay, but they don't usually have a specialist until they're at a certain point. So that's one reason it gets complicated. You need that consistent application of good processes to eliminate that chaos.
Yeah, and I would argue once you get past 25 people, you really do have to start thinking about that, which is why it's a perfect place for somebody like VisionLink to be able to help them come in, set the foundation, before they make that leap of making their own internal hire and managing it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't wait till you've got 600 employees to hire that comp expert. Usually you need people with growing understanding and knowledge and expertise. And that's why there are firms like ours out there that help provide what we call fractional support, like fractional compensation leadership. So,
Right.
And others do the same, but that can be very valuable and a good investment at the right time.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, like, if I am building my leaders list, I know compensation is something I'm supposed to pay attention to, and I probably, structure the organization to get some of that under control. But now I want to make that next step, and I want to make this a serious initiative in the organization. Where do I start? What goes on my leaders list first, beyond just writing compensation?
Yeah, usually want to go at least one step beyond that. So I think it does begin with thinking through your pay philosophy. What are we going to pay for? Then you need to take a look at how are we currently paying, and are we being consistent with the pay philosophy we just say we want to live by, and look for adjustments that might be necessary. A pay philosophy will address, for example, how do we want to benchmark pay levels, salary and wage levels against the marketplace? So that's another important step. We call that building a scalable pay architecture, to where you start organizing positions in the company with appropriate pay levels, kind of validated by market data, which is not that hard to obtain. And then as you make new hires, you can slot them into these positions in that pay grade. Another step that people start taking kind of at that 25 employee level, if not sooner, is incentive plans. Do I offer a bonus plan to my team? If so, what's it going to look like? Do I wait till the end of the year and decide what to pay out? Do I structure it somehow? So those are often the first three steps. Get your pay philosophy organized, validate against market data, and organize a pay grade structure. It can be very simple. You can do it in Excel initially if you want. And then ask yourself, how do I begin to share value, variable pay arrangements with those employees that are my top performers, or perhaps even for everybody in the company?
Yeah. And so if I want to go through that process, is there, obviously one simple answer is they ought to call you. And so we, by the way, we do make all of our contact information available in the show notes. So I would, and I think you accept this, I would highly recommend people reach out to you and ask you questions about how do I get started, and specific things about their organization. I'm sure you'd be available to them.
Always happy to receive questions and give responses without any obligation. Yeah. Absolutely.
That's great. Okay, but then on top of that, I know you guys also make available, some tools that help people through that process, whether they're ready to hire somebody like VisionLink or not. You want to talk a little bit about how you can help in that regard?
Yeah, we do have a tool that people find very helpful for kind of self-analysis. I think we can probably put it in the show notes if you want, Bryon. It's a 24-question self-assessment. You score yourself and you get a little report back, again, confidential report that identifies 6 categories of operating pay effectively and gives you some kind of guidance and ideas on that. So that's a great place for people to start. And then, of course, if they want to discuss that, have conversation about it, our team's always available. But people find that very beneficial.
Yeah. Okay. That'll be awesome. So, Tom, real quick, let's have what are the typical mistakes? Like, what's the thing that almost everybody you look at and you're like, yep, you did it too.
So, there are a number of kind of common mistakes. Why don't we frame it in the context of incentive plans? So companies want to reward people, but they don't want to overcommit on salaries, right? And when people join an organization, if they're talented, they're going to ask, okay, the salary looks pretty good, but what kind of variable pay opportunity do I have? There's two common mistakes made here. The first is they begin with the wrong premise. The common premise is, I want to create an incentive program that will change behaviors. And it sounds kind of right. And ultimately, that might be an outcome you're looking for, but you're thinking about it a little bit backwards. People change their behavior due to intrinsic motivation. I want to be better. I want to make a better contribution. I value the organization. I believe in its mission. I find its future compelling. I want to belong here. I want to contribute. I want to use my skills and talents and my ingenuity and so forth. But most incentive plans are over-designed with dangling carrots, or even worse, little sticks that say, do this, and I'm going to pay you an incentive plan. And so now as an employee, I'm like, okay, I'll do that, I guess. But where's that spark of challenging me to be innovative and creative and feel like an owner and act like an owner and contribute to the conversation? And so too many incentive plans, and we don't even like the term incentive plan. We use a term called value sharing because it fits this idea. Incentive sounds like a carrot. Value sharing is more, hey, Bryon, if you help us create value, you deserve some of it. And so it begins with a different premise. And so then we try and create, okay, it sounds corny here, a vision link. We want to link your vision of growth and performance to our vision of growth and performance, have that conversation. And when we have a great year, we're going to celebrate by sharing some of the value with the people that helped create it. Now, this doesn't mean you don't bake some metrics and factors into the incentive plan, but it means you begin with a different premise and communicate the whole concept more kind of in this more organic and real kind of trusting fashion. That's the first mistake people make when designing incentive plan. I got another one, but let's see if you have thoughts or questions on that one.
Well, all I could think about was Charlie Munger in my ear saying, you show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. And so you certainly want to incent, right? Like you said, there are KPIs that you want to manage to, and you want to incent that in the right way. But I love that cultural perspective of ownership and leadership and incenting that and creativity.
What you want to do is link the incentive, you can call it that, whatever you want to call it, with what happens for the organization. If the organization improves and you've contributed to it, that's what we're paying for. That's what the variable pay program, the value sharing payment, is linked to that. And then we can have a conversation. Can you see, Bryon, how you contributed to that, or things you can do more or better to contribute to that? It's a different level of mature conversation.
Yeah, you could almost call that a vision link. I see what you did there.
Hey, you're onto something there. I like that.
All right. So what else are the common pitfalls?
Yeah. So we have several. The next one I'll mention, staying on the incentive plan idea, is most people reward for short-term performance, but they fail to reward for long-term performance. So think about the public marketplace. Public companies are going to have a short-term incentive plan, but they're also going to offer stock options, restricted stock units to their leadership team at least, and more commonly, deeper in the organization than that. Why do they do that? Well, there are various reasons. Some are even economic, but the fundamental purpose is to align the employees, let's say the leadership team, with the shareholders. Shareholders want their stock to go up, so let's give the employees some stock so that they'll want their stock to go up. Now that's perfect alignment. We have employees who begin to think like owners because they are owners. Private companies generally don't want to dilute their equity and give stock or sell stock to their employees. And we typically advise them not to do it. However, there are alternatives that are similar to stock or stock options that achieve the same purpose, that are much easier to adopt in a private company environment. Many would have heard of the term phantom stock. That's a sample. There are 5 or 6 different variations and types. So we could generally call those long-term incentive plans. So we strongly encourage organizations who are in growth mode, we're going to be bigger, to start a long-term incentive plan for at least their key people, and maybe they'll expand it to more people going forward. So that's the second error, which is only focus your team on short-term results. Don't link them to long-term enterprise value growth. And that can be easily remedied.
And what is your recommendation on not giving equity in the company? Like, why is that relevant to a large company and not a small company?
Well, several reasons. In a small company, you're more concerned about diluting the cap table. Secondly, once you do, you give employees stock. Now, depending upon the rules of the state you're domiciled in, you may have to open the books to those employees. They're going to see how much you're paid. And you may or may not want that. The third thing, from the employee side, in a public environment, they have a ready market to sell their stock when they're ready to. In a private environment, they don't. The only people they're probably restricted to only selling it back to the company or other shareholders who may not be interested in buying it. So you don't have the kind of liquidity flexibility you'd have in the public market.
Yeah, those are all great reasons. Okay, and give us one more, because I know in compensation and incentives, there's got to be hundreds of these challenges, but these are some real nightmares, right? I mean, it kind of blows my mind how many companies do not think about this as a structural. We do a lot of work in pre-due diligence, right? Before you are getting ready to buy another company or sell another company. And it's one of the things that we consistently see is really just not in a great position. So I know there's got to be 100, but these are the ones I want everybody to think about after they listen to this and go make some changes.
Yeah, I would say one of the, I would call it a mistake, one of the things that is absent in most compensation programs is an effective communication plan. Explaining your compensation plan to your employees, making sure they understand it, they value it. If they have questions or concerns, they know where to get answers. If they have, let's say you're offering an incentive plan, a value sharing plan, an annual plan. In small companies, they usually communicate that plan at the end of the year. Well, here's how we did, and we got a bonus for you. The better practice is to, in January, say, hey, Bryon, here's your bonus opportunity. Here's your incentive opportunity, your value sharing opportunity. Let's talk through it, make sure you're clear on it. I want you to be clear on how it works. What are the results needed to optimize its value? I want to confirm if you see those results as achievable. And then I want to know if you see the potential value as meaningful. So we call it clarity, achievability, and meaning. Are you clear? Do you think it's achievable? Is it meaningful? If those 3 things aren't there, we got to regroup and have a conversation about it, because I want it to be meaningful and compelling to you. Now, as the year goes by, each quarter at least, I want to update you. Here's how we're doing. Good news or bad news? Hey, we're tracking below our target this year. Here's what it would mean to your payment at the end of the year. So quarter by quarter, you're learning with us, and we can have a conversation about what to do better, as opposed to just waiting until your first paycheck in January where you get nothing, right, or you get a lot. We want to celebrate the lot, but we want to prepare you for the possibility in some years it might be nothing. So transparency is another one of those values. And so poor communication. If you have a long-term plan, I want you to see the future. If I award you, let's say, phantom stock or something like that, I want you to know what that could be and how much you may harvest and monetize in the future, not just what it was when I gave it to you. So this open, transparent dialogue about the future of your pay opportunity is so valuable and means so much to employees. Even big companies fail to get that right.
Yeah, I love the transparency perspective because, I heard this quote a long time ago: in the absence of communication, all assumptions are bad. Like if I don't hear anything from you, I'm just going to assume it's not going to be good for me. And it may be something that they also don't know how they can contribute. So I love that perspective, Tom. So listen, as we're building our leaders list, we're consistently looking at it. What we always tell everybody is you should always be capturing all of your thoughts and ideas, and then you can reprioritize them later. But after listening to this, if people haven't gone through this work, I think they're going to be crazy not to make compensation an important part of their next leaders list batch. So what would you say are the 2 or 3 things that they ought to start with tomorrow, or as soon as they finish listening to this? What should they do to get started?
Well, most CEOs, let's address this to kind of the CEO mindset, are actively involved in virtually all compensation decisions when the company is small, right? Over time, one of the goals of any organization should be to remove the CEO from 98% of compensation decisions and let them do their job in growing and leading the business to its goals. And so getting informed and educated on how to manage compensation well so that it's not a burden, it's not chaotic, it's organized, should be the fundamental goal of an organization. So I think acquiring resources that will help you do that is important. You can look at websites like ours. You can go to, even you use your favorite LLM to begin to explore standard best practice compensation practices. I think you can only go so far in the AI world and run into some hurdles because they don't actually have the experience of saying, oh, we've seen this work and we've seen that not work. So it's a little more theoretical, but it's a good theoretical foundation that can be laid. And then frame your commitment. Start writing down, how do I want to pay people?
Yeah.
Start grooming that pay philosophy statement. And that will help you to think about pay in a more realistic and practical way. And then get your team together and your leadership team and have a conversation about it. How should we organize and think about pay in order for us to achieve our goals? And treat them in this conversation as if they're partners in the business, and ask them to put that mindset on, that if this is your business, how would you approach pay? Not just for you personally. Everybody will say, well, I want more. We think about this together and teach them the importance of profitability, because the profits are the growth engine. If people want to earn more over time, we have to become more profitable. So opening up that conversation with the people you trust in your organization is so important.
Man, I couldn't agree with you more, because one of the most transformational things I did in one of our organizations was doing some education on what margin looks like and how to manage an account. And I'm always blown away by how many people do not give them the tools to understand, the money behind the business and what makes good business. So that's such a great piece of information. One thing you talked about was taking the CEO out of that. Does that look like HR or the compensation committee, or when do you start to introduce things like that?
Yeah, I'm glad you raised the question about compensation committees, because obviously as companies get bigger, they're going to have an active board. All public companies obviously have active boards, and they're going to have a compensation committee on that board. But even in that environment, that compensation committee is kind of a fiduciary role to make sure that compensation is being groomed and managed appropriately on behalf of the shareholders. Let's set that compensation committee aside. Let's talk about a practical internal compensation committee. So it's an operating committee, the pay operating committee inside the organization. This might begin as early as when you have the CEO and a finance person or HR person, or maybe all three. and they now carve up the duties and responsibilities relative to pay. And as you grow, that committee may grow somewhat too, but the role of the CEO gets diminished as people with compensation expertise or charged to go acquire that expertise take on a bigger and bigger role. By the time a company has, let's say, 1,000 employees, the CEO is barely involved anymore because you have a compensation leader who may be separate from HR or part of HR, but now you have this kind of strategic compensation leader who's taken over. This emerges step by step as a company grows. But the concept is who's making pay decisions aligned with our pay philosophy, who's accountable for those decisions, who's reporting our ROI to our shareholders and having that conversation so that shareholders or the board, CEO, the senior leadership staff, and the employees are all united around pay and how it's driving the organization.
That's so smart. I mean, we focus so heavily on eliminating the CEO bottleneck. And so just that mindset right from the beginning, how can I start to be so transparent that someone else could? I don't have to necessarily build that committee right from the start, but putting the tools in place that someone else, first of all, does the staff understand it, but then could someone else manage to it? That's a great place for every SMB to start.
Once you have a team that's operating it effectively, the CEO's role is to assess the effectiveness of the decision-making and be available to consider exceptions to the standards and guidelines, which invariably sometimes do need to occur.
Yeah, right. It's just part of changing business, right? And evolving. Tom, this has been so great. We want to thank you for coming on and sharing all of your years of knowledge, and congratulations on everything you've done with VisionLink. And again, if anybody wants to go through this process, they can download that set of questions that you'll make available. We'll put those in the show notes, but I highly recommend people reach out to Tom and at minimum just get some of the questions answered that are looming in the backs of our minds, right?
Questions are always fun. Look forward to hearing from any members of your audience at any time. Thank you, Bryon, for having me on.
Thanks again, Tom.